The second piece of evidence I think that needs to be considered is the history of the Bible, because there are many people who believe or that base their belief in God precisely on the Bible. Now, to get to the history of the Bible, I think it's necessary to read the works of biblical scholars. Now, biblical scholars, as far as I can make out, were people who were inside religion, inside the churches, as well as academics that were very much interested to know more about the Bible, and who also had access to all the old texts. Now, what I think can be stated as being common cause by all these biblical scholars is that the Bible itself consists of many books. The books were written over a period of about 1,000 years. And as far as the biblical scholars can make out and agree, is that more than about 40 people over 1,000 years were involved in the writing of the Bible. Now, it's interesting for me, it was very interesting to read all of the books that these biblical scholars wrote, to see, for instance, how it was decided that the Bible as we know it today, how it came about that it is like that. Now, there was a debate for about 200 years about what should be included in the Bible and what should be excluded. One of the original theologians that debated this issue was a guy by the name of, I think, Origen or Origen, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. And he wrote a piece where he made certain suggestions of what should be in the Bible and what should not be in the Bible. And it's interesting that there were about 6 books that it was actually included in the Bible at the end, that he regarded, and this is now about 200 AD, that he regarded as questionable. And yet those books were actually included in the Bible. The fact is that after about 200 years debate, there was then an agreement of some sorts that what should go into the Bible, what should not go into the Bible. The Bible itself, interestingly, doesn't say anything about the period before Jesus was, for instance, 13 years old. There's nothing in the Bible of Jesus between birth and 13 years old. Now, at the time when the Bible was now debated and what should get in it and not, and what should be excluded, at that time there was already a book that was written known as the Infancy Gospel by Thomas. Origen, for instance, was one of the guys that said, but that shouldn't be included. But it is actually available and one can read it today. And what it did is explain various stories about Jesus between the age of, birth and 13. But it really portrayed Jesus in a very bad light. One of the things that I can remember is that Jesus, for instance, was annoyed by another child, and then he basically killed this child. There was another story where he was busy playing and he made a bird out of clay, and he clapped his hands, and then suddenly this clay, a bird, flew away. Now, Origen suggested right in the beginning that that is not a reliable book and that should not be included. But it's interesting that there were others that he described as unreliable, 6 at least, did find its way into the Bible. But bottom line is, the Bible was written over a period of about 1,000 years and by many authors, more than 40. Biblical scholars, I think it's fair to say that most of them agree that the Bible as we know it today is not something that we should read or to take up literally. Even the Pope in 1981 declared publicly that the Bible should not be read literally. It is something that one should regard almost as poetry, as symbolically. And if you read the biblical scholars' writings, and if you read the Bible itself, I think that a reasonable person will agree that the Bible is not a reliable sort of historical book. Now, what I did in my sort of research into this question whether God exists or not is I took the Bible and I decided to concentrate basically on 5 events. You know, it was a bit of a shock to my system, especially because I know somebody who is a creationist. The creation story, Genesis 1 and 2, there are 2 contradictory versions of the creation in the Bible. So that surprised me. I wasn't aware of it. And I even asked my creationist friend, and I said, but what do you say about that? And he didn't know about it. And he didn't believe me. So I said, well, bring your Bible and let me show you. And he actually did. He brought the Bible, we read it. Genesis 1 said something, and Genesis 2 said something else. And I said to him, but you know, you are one of those people who say the Bible should be read literally. What do you say about this contradiction? And I could see the shock on his face, but he recovered quite quickly. And he told me, but the message is still the same. But, you know, if you are one of those people who say the Bible should be read literally, it does create an issue, I think, when Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 differs regarding the creation. And let me just read it for you, and please don't take my word, do your own research and see if I'm talking nonsense or not. Genesis 1 has it that God created plants, then animals, and then man and woman together. Man and woman together. That is in Genesis 1. Genesis 2 has it that God first created man, then plants, then animals, and then finally woman out of the man's rib. So, quite clearly, this is a material contradiction. That's not the only contradiction. Then I went to the flood itself, and I found that according to Genesis 7, paragraphs 2 to 3, Noah took on board the ark 7 pairs of each clean animal and bird, but only 1 pair of each kind of unclean animal. But if you read Genesis 6, paragraphs 19 to 20, as well as Genesis 7, paragraphs 8 to 9, Noah took on board of the ark only 1 pair of each kind of animal and bird, whether clean or unclean. Once again, a material contradiction. Regarding the birth of Jesus, it's very interesting when I did read what the biblical scholars had to say, and then to double check in the Bible. But it's to just stand still a little bit on the fact that according to biblical scholars, Mark was the earliest gospel, and he wrote his gospel about 65 AD. 65 AD. Now, Mark didn't say anything about the birth of Jesus. Now, Matthew and Luke, they wrote their gospels according to the biblical scholars between 80 and 90 AD. And it is generally accepted by all biblical scholars that Matthew and Luke used Mark as a source. Now, it's interesting that Matthew and Luke, who's using Mark as a source, who doesn't even say anything about the birth of Jesus, that they actually wrote about the birth of Jesus 80 to 90 years after the event. Here is my summary of what Matthew had to say about the birth of Jesus. Scholars from the east went to King Herod in Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the newly born king of the Jews?" King Herod was alarmed and called a meeting with the chief priests and the experts of the law. They told him that according to the prophecy, the Messiah was to be born in Bethlehem. So King Herod sent the scholars to Bethlehem with a request that if they find the Messiah, they must send word to him. A star led the scholars to where the little child was. Then an angel warned Joseph to flee to Egypt to escape the wrath of King Herod. King Herod was so angry, he had all the boy children under age 2 killed in Bethlehem and surrounding areas. This is now what Matthew had to say about the birth of Jesus. Here's my summary of what Luke had to say about the birth of Jesus. A decree was issued by Caesar Augustus that the census should be taken of the whole inhabited world, and everybody had to go to his own city. Joseph was of the house and lineage of David, and therefore had to go to the city of David, which is Bethlehem. Jesus was born, and an angel appeared to the shepherds to tell them the Messiah was born. The shepherds went to Bethlehem and found Jesus and went back glorifying and praising God because everything was exactly as they had been told. After about a week, Joseph and Mary took Jesus to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. In Jerusalem, Simeon blessed Jesus as the Messiah. Joseph and Mary then returned to Nazareth. Now, I would like to suggest to you that this is now materially contradictory versions in the Bible by somebody who is not even a direct eyewitness. Okay, let's go to the resurrection. Now, it is agreed by the biblical scholars that Matthew and Luke used Mark as a source, but Mark's version of the resurrection was quite short and abrupt, and it is said that it wasn't very popular because of that. Now, Matthew and Luke, who used Mark as a source, their version of the resurrection, interestingly enough, when you write Mark's version, Matthew's version, and Luke's version next to each other, you will find that all three versions, the first 90% maybe of these versions, are word for word the same, exactly the same, word for word. But their part that Mark, the ending of Mark, who people didn't like, that is now deleted. It's not in Matthew and Luke's version. Matthew and Luke's version at the end completely contradicts each other. It's two different stories, and once again I invite you to go and have a look, do your own research. Bottom line is, it appears that Matthew and Luke, they plagiarized Mark's gospel, but then invented their own version because now it was unpopular, Mark's version. So Matthew and Luke's version is completely different from each other, completely differently. So what can we get from this particular information? And there's plenty more if you really read and study the history of the Bible and so on. The Bible cannot be a source to prove anything. It's too unreliable. There are just too many contradictions. It is quite clear that some of the versions, the resurrection, there are three versions in the Bible, that at least two of them are are invented and made up. And I suggest to you that that is the problem that you have with the Bible. It's a man-made document that is not historical. You cannot rely on it as a source.